We're going to go ahead and get started again. Keep the agenda moving. Hope everyone enjoyed the break and the agenda so far. I'll give it a few more minutes for everyone to settle down. Our last panel discussed the tools and technologies that are fundamentally changing the art and science of marketing. Our next panel will dive into the changing customer journey and our measurement of it. Without further ado, I'd like to introduce our moderator, Megan Chan, Director of Digital Operations at the Washington Post, a longtime supporter of the IAA. Sorry, I should have given you more lead time to get up here.
Okay, I'm not quite running.
If the panel wants to make their way towards the stage as well, please.
Sorry. Good morning, everybody. It's still morning, right? Okay. I think all the panelists are coming up now. I think they're. Yeah. I don't have a speech for all of you. Sorry. There's no band? Also, if you want to know how to spell unce, it's E-U-N-C-E, FYI. I think just take a seat wherever. All right, good morning, everybody. Thank you so much for having me. My name is Megan Chan, Director of Digital Operations at the Washington Post. You probably don't know what that means. That's totally fine. It usually changes about every hour. I sit in the newsroom. I'm responsible for digital performance and traffic. And so I'm really excited to be here today to talk with our panelists. I think their expertise is really going to help inform a lot of the ways that sort of we as publishers, as content creators, think about sort of our customers or our readers. So I guess we can dive right in. But before I do, let me just introduce our panel really quickly. Right here, we have Andy Donkin, who's the CMO of Under Armour. Next to him, we have Toni Clayton-Hine, SVP and CMO of Xerox Corporation. Next to her, we have Amy Sokotch, SVP of Citi, and Chris Drago, Global Media Director from HP Enterprises. So thank you so much for being here. So the title of our panel is something about learning about the customer journey and tracking people. So just to kind of kick us off, I'd love to hear from you guys. Sort of where do you think we are in terms of tracking people? The theme of, I think, the day is really about disruption. That's been going on since the beginning of time. What's sort of new for you guys? What's really top of mind when we're thinking about this and sort of the big challenges that you're facing right now?
Wow, that's a big question to start.
I know. Oh, and there's so many more, Andy.
I'll kick it off. One thing, and there's probably 15 things we could talk about, right? But one of the things that's super interesting for us is this idea of beginning to move to internal publishing of content. So what does that mean? It means building an internal agency. It means beginning to actually publish content on our own, content that for us is around sports and culture. It's figuring out how to do that in a really cost-effective manner. Hopefully there's no agency people in here, right? Sorry. But the old agency models of building content is way too overburdened in terms of cost. So we got to go figure out how to do it together with the agencies, where we may do some stuff internally, we may do a bunch of stuff externally, but it all has to be done in really cost-effective ways. In the days of my old days in CPG, where it was like there's 15 levels of approval and it has to be perfectly polished content, those days are over. So figuring out how to build an organization that can move fast and develop content is part of one of the big challenges we have.
Well, we're in a pretty different spot because many of you might know Xerox as a company split into two companies in January. So I have one that is where I am, which is the traditional, how you think of Xerox, document technology, printing, document management, and then the company that became Conduent, which was business process outsourcing. And so for us, we focus on how do we ensure that we've got the right audience and the right segments that we're measuring based on who we are today and where we want to go. So actually almost the opposite. I'm a little afraid to say this, but we rely a lot on our agency partners to Talk to John.
Oh, no, everybody's going to talk to you now. No one's talking to me. He's just like,
But it's really for us just being able to tap into, I'll call it the broader collective knowledge base of how many other great ideas are out there, how many other ways could we think of new and different ideas to engage the audience that we're trying to connect with, and it show them not what Xerox has stood for, not from 110 years ago to when it had two companies, but where we are today and where we want to go. So we spend a lot of time on that.
Cool. And at Citi, I think, so where I sit, which is really focused on the media and advertising side, I think the way things have changed is that, we used to go to market with probably like 2 or 3 big messages that we ran in a bunch of different media, TV, print, digital, et cetera, and we'd have this sort of giant 360-degree campaign. We still do that today to some degree, but I think we sort of go beyond those giant campaigns, and now we can sort of have more specific, sort of discrete conversations with different audiences using technology. So, for example, we can speak to our existing customers and remind them all the great benefits that they get with their Citi card, and we can do that in paid media. In the old world, you could do that in email or direct mail in these very sort of one-to-one channels, and now you can kind of take that thinking and apply it to advertising. And so depending on where someone is in the journey with Citi, we can serve them up a very relevant message, whether that's on Facebook or other digital media. And we can do that extremely efficiently as well, so you don't have to spend hundreds of millions of dollars to do that. You can do it very, very efficiently.
We're in a similar position as Xerox, but we started our separation about 1.5 years ago. And when HP split into 2 companies, it gave us as Hewlett Packard Enterprise, which on any given day, depending on who you ask, we're the #1 or #2 server provider in the world. It gave us an opportunity to stand up on our own and to really refocus on our core customer. In the past, we'd been a bit overshadowed by HP. Everyone knows HP for the printer and PC company, the great company that they are. But when we split, we were able to really look at who do we want to talk to. Let's start from scratch. We stood up a new website, which enabled us to really add in all of the sort of the ad tech and bells and whistles that, frankly, we'd always dreamed of, so that could then enable a transformation around data-driven marketing, so that we can ensure that we could build over time the ability to really reach that right customer with the right message at the right time. And we're 1.5 years in, and we've spent a lot of time laying the foundation. There's a lot of just foundational work that needs to be done to make sure that we're connecting the dots, that we're bringing all of our data together. Just in the last year, we have really great first-party data on hand that we can then really combine with some quality third-party data to then use that from a targeting and decisioning standpoint through programmatic. The tracking piece, I know we'll talk more about that. We're beginning to figure it out to make sure that we have that end-to-end view of our customer from the time that we engage someone all the way through the time that someone within our sales team can pick up the phone and actually have a conversation. We focus a lot on digital, and that's absolutely important. That's where our customers are. But with us as a B2B organization, we need to remember that that's not the only thing, right? We need to also make sure we're engaging people and helping sales and enable them to ultimately close the deal.
So I think there's this big theme about data, right? And what that seems to mean sort of a lot of different things. How do you guys look at data? How do you make sure that you're not sort of getting paralyzed by data? Where do you put priorities on what kind of data?
Well, I can start. I think from the Citi side, there's so many endless possibilities of like data combinations that you could do. And I think for us, sometimes we have to just simplify, because we'll just go crazy if we start to think about all the little micro segments that we could be speaking to. And it ends up not actually being that actionable to talk to a tiny little sub-segment. The scale just isn't necessarily going to be there when you then match that data with like a publisher's data. Things get very tiny, so we almost have to push ourselves to go slightly larger But also, I think it just comes down to like what are the objectives of the campaign? What are you trying to achieve? And what's the right audience depending on what those objectives are. And so it starts to become, when you have that conversation, it starts to become clear, should we go after this audience or this audience? And you can start to, I think, prioritize a little bit. Yeah.
For us, I feel like we kind of go the other way sometimes, and we get so focused on what does the data tell that we stop using the data to inform our decision, and data becomes the reason we make a decision. And what I just mean by that is the data could tell you one thing, but then logic has to prevail on top of that. So, when you get a recommendation to sub-segment a target based on a data set, and you go, I get that, but something's not right. Like that, it doesn't seem like it's this, but not quite, right? So I feel like we spend a lot of time talking about don't just give me the data, tell me the analysis, and tell us what we do about it, which is normal. But then also to make sure that we kind of put logic to that and say, well, as we're all in this, even though we're in a B2B company, we're still consumers, we're still living online, we're still doing that every day. And so we should just make sure that the data informs what we do and not just blindly follow it as well.
So how do you develop that gut instinct?
For us, it's really knowing your target market, right? And it's knowing sort of demographics and psychographics. And, we've spent a lot of time, for Xerox, we break I call it the buyer and the user. So a buyer, which would be sort of a CIO, CFO, IT person, very much in, kind of Chris's space, but they're caring about things in a very different way than the user. I call the user maybe, Debbie data processor who's processing tons of invoices and needs a workflow to be able to do that, or somebody who's in sales who needs to be able to be very mobile. So we need to break those personas. I'm not sure I love the term persona; it feels so overused. But break those into real people and constituencies. Maybe I like that better. And be able to create messaging the same way that she's talking about that too.
I think there's data and then there's like behavior, right?
Yeah.
So I think we can use data to help better inform, how we're reaching people and then looking at what they're doing once they come and engage with us. But then I think it's important that we then make the next step to, well, then let's learn a little bit about what they're actually doing through technology. Mm-hmm. And then based on that, then I think that gives us greater insight to actually reach the people that we want to reach. We just last couple months, bought a bunch of third-party data, a couple different partners. Well, we overlaid that with the Millward Brown study to see, are we in fact getting the audiences that we wanted to get? We were wanting to buy IT decision makers and developers. Well, wouldn't you know, across the board, there's 60% wastage of an audience that we had no interest in buying. So to me, that says, what's the value? First off, we have to hold data partners accountable to make sure that based on what we're paying for, that we're getting. But number two, looking at, all right, does it really make sense to go out and buy this third-party data? Is it better to then just look at, of the people coming into our site, and are they, based on what they're engaging with, do they exemplify the behavior of like an IT decision maker? And then let's do a lookalike model off the back of them to then reach more people that look like that. So I think I think there's still some work that needs to be done in their third-party data space. And I think we need to really put a microscope on what is it that we're buying and what, in fact, is it doing for us.
I think you just to build on that, you asked a question about building gut instinct, right? And it's going to come as a shock, but I'm not 22 years old. I know that's a shock. So instinct becomes even more important to the calculation because I'm sure for Citi, for us, that young customer is critical to the long-term health of the brand. And so one is data is art and science. It's both, right? And so you can learn a lot about your customer through that, but then you have to be very intuitive to understand how to actually put it to use. And I have a really easy answer for how you get better is actually you go talk to your customers and you get out in the marketplace. It's so funny. We all have all this data in front of us, but some of the most valuable times are just getting out out to the market and talking to cultural influencers, talking to folks that you don't experience on a day-to-day basis. And that's both in the US and culturally globally, right? Getting out. I've had some of my most amazing times talking to people that I have the luck of being able to get in front of and just hear from them. So I think that ability to get some of the gut instinct through the experiences you have actually makes the data that much better.
Have you guys ever been in a situation where you've gone through that and you've talked to the influencers and you've been like, oh, maybe we should stop right now, this thing we've been building for a year?
Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
You know, in Under Armour's business, we have kind of a listening ear with the social influencers, the bloggers, and they're very influential. Let's take a category like basketball, right? Very, very influential in terms of as a new product comes out, talking to their customer base. And you know, if you went with the data, you'd say, oh, they only have 20,000 followers, but the impact of those followers far outweighs even someone who may have 100,000 or 200,000 followers. So being able to identify and talk to those folks, they can give you immediate feedback and all of a sudden throw your plans completely out of whack. And so you go back to the drawing board. But I think that's what we all live in right now. I think what's changed in the marketplace is you used to build these big plans for 6 months, 12 months. You had your media plan. You're like, I'm going on vacation. And then you come back and it'll be fine. Now every day is different. And you have to be able to adapt to that.
So what is sort of the biggest challenge for you guys or the biggest opportunity that you see?
It's interesting. I mean, on the data piece, it took some time for us. There is data work happening all across our organization. And I think so organizationally, I think it's really important that people are honest with themselves about what can be done. To bring everything together in one place helps a lot. But when you have different groups and different organizations, you have to break down silos in order to do that. So I think for companies like us, it's really taking the time to make sure we're bringing that together as an expertise, and then showing the organization as a whole how the different silos can actually benefit from from that. And a lot of people there's a lot of education that needs to happen because people don't know what the opportunity is and what the possibilities are. So that's something we work with our agency partners to help and internally to help just evangelize and really up-level the digital understanding of what data can do.
Yeah, I mean, for a 110-year-old brand, it is help for now. It's helping you understand what Xerox stands for now. I mean, people think Xerox, they think print, copy, fax, right? And so when I talk about the fact that you can translate and you can put a document in, it comes out in 35 different languages, and that you can move data all over the place, and that you can have a workflow that allows a hospital to triple the throughput of their patients because they can have them input into the front desk and then streamline to the emergency room and radiology all at once. And that you can, and that can, right? There's thousands of scenarios for the people that interact with our machines at a departmental. That's why I'm obsessed with this user component right now, right? Which is, if I could help you understand, in the same way that you don't use your iPhone today to make phone calls and you don't treat your iPhone or smartphone the same way that you do your Motorola StarTAC, that for me is the biggest challenge and opportunity, is to help people understand what we have and how we can impact their lives.
I don't know what you guys think, but one of the big things is talent. Right, taking off of the data side of it, especially as you're building an organization, right, the ability to find folks who actually have the passion and the breadth of talent. I'll give you an example. There's even new terms for talent, right? A predator. What's a predator? Well, I know what a predator is. It's not that. It's someone who actually can produce, edit, act, all in the same content. And BuzzFeed is a great example of taking advantage of that particular model. And so how do you find folks in a creative organization that both feel empowered and give them the opportunity to actually build their portfolio? And frankly, that goes on the digital side too, because digital is becoming as much about the creative content. Yes, it's tracking, but that ability to break through with that customer audience. So talent is one of those things that the landscape is changing quickly, and you need to be able to give the folks you bring into the organization the opportunity to build their portfolios regardless of where they sit.
So when you are looking at talent and recruiting, what are the new skill sets that you're looking for? Like what does the unicorn for you guys look like?
I would say about a year ago, I hired someone from a media agency. He was sort of heading up analytics within a media company, and brought him in to be sort of head of media analytics on my team, and did a great job and was doing that for a while. But then I realized, wow, he knows a lot about programmatic. He gets digital strategy. And so about a year later, was able to sort of pivot him into a different kind of role that had analytics as the backbone, but then he could then develop and really help scale what we're trying to do from a data-driven marketing standpoint. So similar to we have working with a new agency team with Digitas, and our new global head of our account is not sort of traditional media sort of account guy, but he's also an analytics guy, who now is taking those skills and really helping us not just build our analytics operation, but making sure data and analytics really is throughout everything that we do. So for me, it's looking in those maybe not the traditional places of for said media role, but looking at what are some of those core skills that if we could somehow sort of up-level it, could really help our entire organization.
Yeah, I would just add, I think that that combination of creativity and then analytical skills is really powerful. And I think pretty much regardless of the role you're in, I think it's helpful to be able to think creatively, to analyze data, even if you're not in an analytical function, because we all have a responsibility to do it, and I think that's just where we're going to start to make or pull out those good insights is when you actually sort of go beneath the surface and pull out the interesting nuggets. So I think people who can sort of take a step back and really kind of go beneath the surface and question the data and question why something might have been effective, I think is very helpful in any function. And then on the creative side, it's just then once you have the insight, it's then coming up with an interesting creative idea for how to leverage that data is always very useful.
For me, it's kind of the macro view would be agile, creative problem solver. And I know that sounds like, well, of course, everybody wants that. But I think at the same time that we, in the B2B space, I'm constantly looking at what is happening in the B2C space that we could repurpose or make applicable to our audience to be disruptive about that. What is in the technology space? What's happening outside of the technology space? What's in consumer packaged goods? What's in the automotive industry? Anna, who was up here from, I think it was Prudential earlier on the previous panel, the way that they're approaching that, I took a bunch of notes. I think that there's a lot of different things that we owe it to ourselves, and so pushing our teams to look at outside of the traditional ways that we've done things. So be creative about that, and then apply that to the moving targets that we have, right? I think to the team, I don't want to hear we got a budget cut and therefore fill in the blank. No, find a different way. Come up with a different solution, recut the pie, so it's a lot of pushing. And actually I find that's actually hard to find, who's somebody who's willing to jump out. And that's why we actually use a lot of agencies, is that people get stuck feeling like, it's the pressure of the day. There's only 24 hours in a day. It's a day to day. And so just that in an agency environment, they often have times to interact, coming to events like these where they have an opportunity to interact with just different thinking, different ways people solve problems, right? I mean, you guys are talking about excellent things, and I'm like, oh yeah, we should take a note. That's really good stuff, So that's that for us.
I think it's just kind of building on it, it's mashed up talent, right? It's a
Yeah.
PhD who can be creative. It's a executive creative director who knows how to run a business. The other thing that's really cool today is there's amazing talent that are freelancers. And they've chosen to be freelancers because they want the kind of ability to do many different things. And so you kind of have to break down your own model of what an organizational hierarchy looks like and take advantage of freelancers in this economy, which is just amazing talent. Which changes, you never thought about that before. It's like, oh man, it's a temporary work. It's actually not. It's someone who can actually help you in ways that
And
you're
they're
involved in.
hungry,
Yeah.
right? They're hungry,
Yeah.
and then they can come in and come out and bring something new. And I'm a big fan. I'm a big fan of that too, for that reason.
I think that's the same thing for us in the editorial space. It used to be like freelancer was you can't get a job, you only
Right.
have like $100.
I'm a freelancer.
Right. And I live at home.
Right.
But I think that's like a really changing dynamic, which is something that, what you guys have talked about is this space is changing so rapidly and so quickly. Andy, I think you had mentioned when we were talking earlier, something about experimentation and how important that was. Can you guys talk a little bit about how experimentation works, how you figure out those calculated risks that you're willing to take?
Yeah, I mean, for us, and kind of over the last probably 6-7 years, both at Amazon and Under Armour, these big problems that we're talking about, big data problems, right? You can get overwhelmed by it. So experimentation for us is a way to make the problem smaller. By that I mean it's creating an experiment that gives you a signal to tell you whether you're on the right track. And again, it's a little bit art, a little bit science, but we've used it in everything from social media to TV campaigns where we might do something at a regional level before we go national. We've done it in terms of testing a hypothesis as it relates to a model that we built in analytics. And as long as you can move fast and don't get caught up in always testing and never executing, it's kind of like, I think about it as a portfolio, I don't know how you guys think about it, where you might have 10 ideas you want to go test. 3 of those are gonna fail. 3 of those will be, they'll be okay. And then whatever the remaining number was, 2 or 3 ideas will be really good, and you'll hit the gas and you'll scale those. So that has to be constant in the organization because it actually keeps the organization really nimble.
One of the things we're trying to do is create kind of a learning agenda for the company. Because I think there's a very well-intentioned people who are always wanting to sort of test new things and look at the bright shiny object. But we need to get more organized and really set out, hey, what is it this year that we as a company want to learn? And then let's really think, what's the crawl, walk, run approach of testing and learning? What are the things we want to do in the next 3 months as proof of concept campaigns that we can then build from and go from there? It's a challenge, but I think if you can get that organized, it makes the outcome that much more impactful.
Mm-hmm. I think similar at Citi, it's when we get in the room, we'll talk through so many different use cases with us and our agency partners and various teams within Citi, and we can sort of go all day talking about like really exciting use cases, but when it gets down to it, like you have to sort of be realistic and not try to kind of test too much, especially at the same time. So it's about testing probably 2 or 3 different things at a given point in time, learning from those, and then, scaling kind of what works. And I think, that's where I think you can kind of make the best use of some of the technology that we have. Sometimes when you talk about like the promise of ad tech and a DMP, and it's using machine learning, and it's figuring out exactly what to serve a cookie at the right time based on their behavior, like that all sounds well and good, but in reality, at a place like Citi, when we've got all these different business units and different P&Ls and so many different things we could be talking about with the consumer, it's not really realistic to sort of let the DMP just like openly decide what to run. And it would be very difficult to then even get the results back and be able to learn something from it. So instead, it's about like, okay, we've got these 2 different messages and this, potential audience. Let's see, which messages is going to resonate better with this particular audience, and kind of go from there and take a more simplified approach. And over time, you can get more, I think, sophisticated. So that's probably how we do it from the data side of things.
Yeah, ours is a pretty different scenario. One, just from my personality, which is I love to try new things. The team goes, oh my God, like I have 100 ideas every day, and 99 of them are terrible. So we're going to go with it. So I tend to try to hire people around me that are much more pragmatic. We should talk. Because I'm not. But I would say that just for Xerox, they've spent so much time as a company being very guardrail driven. And so I'm really trying to push the pendulum the completely opposite side and say, try it, experiment. We're 14 weeks into a new company, a new instantiation of our company. Try it, go. I mean, when we had Valentine's Day and I put our logo into a heart, I had 4 meetings. I was like, is this really happening? I had to call legal to put a globe behind our logo for Earth Day. Like, that actually happened. And so we just need to, so I'm coming from I am terrified to experiment, so we need to give them some air cover to be the creative people that they are.
Yeah, it's awesome. And I think that taking that risk, figuring out how in the infrastructure you can take the risk without having 4 meetings. And again, if you look at kind of the younger part of the workforce, you got to figure out a way to create the guidelines and then let them go.
Right.
And that can be super scary, especially when your experience is, oh man, there's a certain layers I have to go through. I'm messing with the brand.
Right.
Yeah. Oh my God. Like the apocalypse. So figuring out.
Were you on that call? Actually, the social person said, brand won't let me do this. I'm like, last time I think I'm
and you're like, wait, let me check my title. Oh, wait a minute.
So yes.
Yeah, that messing with the brand. Again, if you go back again, I was in the CPG world. And that was sacrosanct. That logo you created, oh my God, you could not mess with it. Look at what's happening today in terms of the way people use their brands and are willing to mess with them in ways that are super creative and take risk. And that's what people are talking about, not, oh my God, the brand hasn't changed in 20 years. That's cool.
Right. Right.
I mean, what are the tips and tricks that you guys have in terms of getting buy-in internally and setting those expectations? You guys are all at really sort of sprawling enterprises. How do you make sure everyone at the company understands what you're doing?
Number one, I'd say that's impossible. Especially, you guys are even bigger companies than I work for, and that would be impossible. But there are communication tools now internally, Slack, Yammer, that you can use as a way to communicate what you're doing, which is super helpful. I think the danger of trying to communicate everything always is that you'll just get bogged down and you won't be able to do anything. So I think in some cases you got to respect the hierarchy, but in some cases you have to ask for permission later, and you have to go do it. And then you get the data, and you figure it. But that's why you have to parse the risk in ways that you're not going to bet the company with the idea that you're going to go out and do. So you need to be respectful of that.
And I think at Citi, it feels like in the last few years, there's this real culture of just wanting to test and learn and be innovative. And so to me, it hasn't been that hard to sort of sell through new, interesting opportunities to test different marketing tactics at Citi, because people are they're open to it. And it's just a very collaborative environment as well. I mean, not always, but I think we're pretty good at bringing people in from different disciplines and talking through what is the challenge, and kind of letting the experts from their respective area lead. But there is this sort of openness and collaboration, I think, that's just the culture. And so I think that, to me, helps in terms of selling through ideas, because if you come to the table with the idea and with the rationale, people seem pretty open to it. We did a whole bunch of stuff with VR last summer. We're continuing to do stuff in that space, and it hasn't really been totally proven out yet because it's still so new. It's definitely still in the test and learn space, but it's interesting, and for Citi it was a way, because we do a lot in the entertainment world with concerts and basically giving customers access to tickets to attend concerts basically through pre-sales and things like that. And so one of our objectives was how do you deliver, or how do you give people access beyond attendance? So we know that they're like physically buying tickets to go to concerts, but how can we sort of give them that experience when they don't feel like actually going physically? Because we know that that's, takes a lot. And so we're now kind of giving people that concert experience through virtual reality so they can have that experience from the comfort of their home. And so it's certainly still really small in its infancy, but it made sense strategically with Citi and what we're doing from an entertainment category perspective. So there was the rationale to test it, and we're certainly not, spending like our entire marketing budget on that. It's a tiny little piece, so you can justify it.
What's helped me is finding an advocate in another part of the organization who I think would be supportive of this new thing that we want to create, and then create it together, and then make them part of the process from the beginning, so that we then together can go to management and say, hey, we have this idea, we think this will be good for the following reasons. So makes it much easier than just me going on my own to say, hey, I want to do this, but by showing, bringing the web team along, if we want to do something around, advanced tracking, or, the brand and advertising team along if we want to create a cool new, content-led program. Being aware of, what would be mutually successful, and then just finding, a partner to advocate with.
Mm-hmm. I do a lot of it's almost talking to your customers, right? Find the influencers within the organization, and often I'll make sure that, did you talk to the salesperson in the region? Did you talk to the manager on the offering team? Did you talk, so you've got sort of 3 or 4 touch points, and then when you go into a meeting at, the CEO meeting, then you're saying, I've talked to this representation of constituents, and this was the input that they gave to help shape this so that it looks like that. So I do a lot of participatory conversations, and I'm lucky to have come from the business side. So I have those relationships. I would think that, from coming in from the outside, it can be a little bit more difficult to find out who is the, influencer that is not related to the title on the screen, but holds a lot of
they have the
sway.
title there, influencer.
Right.
I just go, that's what I look for, yeah.
Find it.
Yeah, exactly. Exactly. It's in the directory.
That person.
Yeah.
So, but that's an advantage for us from that standpoint.
Yeah. So thinking of it, you guys have been sort of the brains behind a lot of really impressive things, but is there something in your mind that you've looked at a competitor or a colleague where you've been like, oh, I wish I did that, or that was so smart, I'm definitely stealing that?
Well, you talked about, I'll say, like, you just talked about the HP split, right? So the fact that HP Inc., which is the printing and imaging business, is a year and a half ahead of us. And so they just came out with this campaign with Christian Slater around security. And I was like, oh, I can't even talk about it. I'm so jealous. Like, it's so freaking great. And so I get like 900 emails that say, can we do that? And I'm like, they all respond back, 1 year ahead of us, 1 year ahead of us, So from the standpoint that you just, I use cooking analogies a lot. I'm like, you can put all the ingredients in, but you can't turn up the oven. Like, we got to go through our process of what do we stand for? What's the narrative? How do we communicate that so that we can get to the manifestation of this really unique creative thing? But I'd have to go on record that HP campaign is great. It's really good. I'm very jealous. It's good stuff.
I would say, John Fredette's here, IBM does a great job. And, we
Except for he works for Xerox now.
Oh, that's right, sorry.
I just would like to go on record that all that brain power that you just said, he works here.
The work that John did in the past to lay the groundwork for his new position. No, I look at the IBM work, and creatively, really impressive. The way that, from a media standpoint, IBM can really take a strong position, and that time of year that IBM is going to sort of launch their next campaign, and that media can be out in front and really be strategic about how they're planning, and then figure out creatively how to how to slot things in. So for me, I continue to look at some of that work, and all the way from creative to media, the connection points that the company makes is still something I certainly look at.
There's a campaign I saw. I was lucky enough to be part of the Clio judging, and we saw a campaign for a company in Australia called Optus. And what I thought was amazing about it was that it's a telecom support network, right? Very sexy. Any Optus people here? And so that's hard, right? How do you make that emotional? How do you make that real? And they had a very simple idea with this Olympic campaign where they basically recorded the conversations of the athletes telling their loved ones that they had made the Rio Olympic team. And what an amazing, simple idea. And the emotion in those recordings was amazing, and all something that we could relate to. And it really supported the objective, the idea that they're a media support network, and here they were supporting the athletes going to Rio. So simple ideas like that are just so amazing. And that idea obviously took the form of both digital and TV, so they used omnichannel. But I thought that's just a great example of taking a very simple idea and turning it into a very emotional connection.
So when you guys are looking at these things, you're like, oh, I wish I did that. Are you reverse engineering in your brain kind of like how that works at your company? How, back to the title of the panel, the customer journey.
Hint, hint.
Just saying.
Yeah, so if we really be honest, if we can be honest with ourselves about who we want to reach and what's truly differentiating about our companies, then I think that helps us create these things that are truly unique and differentiating for our customers, right? So and that's not easy, right? That's not just something that we're gonna issue an RFP about and get some responses and then put the media plan together. It's really sitting around the table with a lot of folks in the room. The Washington Post team is right in front of me, so it's sitting down and hey, this is the business problem we're trying to solve, and this is who we're going to reach. And no, the answer is not going to come out of one meeting, but we're going to get the creative people involved from our side and creative folks from various content teams, and really roll up our sleeves to create something unique that's going to be mutually beneficial for both our organizations, but also something that's going to, at the end of the day, stand out and create engagement for our customers.
And I think, just to add, I think some of the best ideas do come from taking the time to actually get there. And so it might take a little longer in the upfront planning phase. But then down the line, once you have that really killer idea, then you can kind of move very quickly from there, because everybody sort of knows that, knows what the strategy is, the creative platform, and you can kind of you can all sort of be on the same page and execute a ton of ideas more quickly and on the fly. Our double cash campaign, I think the team at Publicis took the time in partnership with Citi to get to the creative idea, and it took probably a long time to get there, felt like a long time to get there, but then once we had it, the double cash means what it says was basically the idea. From there, it's doing really well, and it has a lot of legs, and you can take that idea and bring it to a BuzzFeed or a Facebook or all these other places and kind of translate it to all those environments and move quickly. But I think spending a little extra time on the upfront, I think, can pay off in the end, even though it feels sort of very slow at the time.
For me, it's that human connection. Humans like good stories, So when you're in the B2B space, when you see, because we're in a situation today where there's more acceptance and requirement to tell a B2C story in a B2B space, right? So it's a little bit different for us maybe than if you're already in a CPG world or something like that. So we talk about how the customer journey, what do they call it, right? It's not B2B, B2C, it's B2H, human. So it becomes much more of that, which I'm not like a huge fan of, but it makes sense to me, right? But again, it's the same idea that if we can find what's the right story for that right person at the right time, and then being able to use the technology to say that, right? Because we have access to all this incredible technology that can segment and target and tell threaded stories, not just omni-channel, but based on who you are, where you are in your buying cycle, and what you're thinking about at the time. We're really fortunate to be able to tap into that, at this stage of the game, and then imagine where it's going. That's incredible.
I agree with you. And just to add to that, it's, I think we need to be honest with ourselves as brands about what customers want to hear from us about.
Oh, absolutely.
Right? It's like there's only so much time in the day that people have time to do anything. And then we want them to actually read a white paper that is coming from our company, and we want them to fill out a form to do that. So let's really think what value can we as brands add to the conversation, and then do it in the right way so that people can have the time to engage.
Yeah, on the consumer side, I'll blow that up for a minute. I think actually there's certain content that they can't get enough of. Let's take an example. We have The Rock. The Rock has 80 million Instagram followers. Pretty much when The Rock talks, people want to hear about it.
Can he sell servers?
Shit. I don't know. You can talk to him. I think he's busy with Ford right now. So it is different, right? But I think this is where you blow up kind of all of your metrics that you might think work. The one that I kind of push my team on is ROAS. That's the best we can do. Come on, guys, help me in the room. ROAS, that's the best we can do. There's got to be ways that we can build better metrics around the ability for consumers to consume media across multiple platforms in a day and figure out which one of those platforms actually leads to a purchase, not leads to purchase intent, not leads to interest, actually leads to a purchase. Where for us and probably for Citi, you have an advantage because we've got a site where we can actually see whether people are actually making those purchases. Maybe a little more tough for you guys, although you can see the leads. But I think for us, it's how do you blow up the current metrics because the game has completely changed? And how do you actually understand incrementality within the context of media that you're doing so that it isn't I'm just shifting demand around from one channel to another. I'm actually connecting with new customers. So if you guys know better ideas than ROAS, you let me know.
I would say along those lines, we that concept in the digital journey of, kind of your web journey that says next best action, right? What's the next thing I want you to do? I don't think we apply that enough into our other marketing assets and things, right? So is the next, in order to get you to engage with that white paper, right? What are the 17 actions that have to have come place so that the next best action, and then you go, okay, but that's not linear, as we know. So what do we do about that? And how do we set ourselves up for success based on what that is? So for me, it helped kind of simplify what could be a very convoluted way to tell the story, just to say, have we done everything that we could do to think of, have we set up ourselves for success based on the next action, because we tended to do, and we still do now, I feel like, we started with we have an offering, and we want to lead, okay, go, or Marketo, that, as though that's the answer, right? Or, so that's just a tool, so then we have to think that through.
I like that. I'm going to blow up the metrics. Well, I think that's a really good note. I want to make sure we have some time for questions. I think there's a mic that's going around, so just raise your hand if you'd like to ask a question.
Hi there, Brendan Spain with the Financial Times. Great panel, thank you. So there's a lot of talk in the beginning about third-party data, which I think has become widely accepted in the industry. But in this room, we have lots of publishers who spend quite a bit of time and energy creating first-party data sets that we don't sell to data providers. I'm sort of wondering, where in your media or marketing plans do you lean on first-party data from publishers? Is there still space for it? And if so, how does that add value, I guess, to the mix when you can't necessarily scale it as well as third-party?
I think it plays a role. I think it could, if there's a way to somehow pipe it into, our sort of data infrastructure that can then become a piece of, additional data piece that we can use for targeting and retargeting, and talked a little bit about lookalikes before. But I absolutely see it, see a role for it.
Yeah, we do too, especially if there's enough scale with that publisher too. That's always helpful. We do a lot of work with, well, obviously Facebook, because everybody works with them, they're giant. But when you kind of can match your first-party data to a publisher's first-party through like an intermediary, so we work with LiveRamp to do that, that's a very powerful combination. And then other sites like Amazon, they've got giant audience of buyers, and so their audience is super valuable to a company like Citi, where we're trying to get you to spend more with your Citi card. So it depends on the publisher, but yeah, definitely I think first-party data is where it's at. It's very valuable, and I probably trust it more than a lot of the third-party sources out there.
I think it changes the relationship with the publisher. I think when we look at publishers that we work with, it begins to be about how do we create together content that people care about. The publishers in this room are about creating content that their readers want to read. We're in a weird way, we're in a business of making sure that people are connected to sports and culture. So from a publishing standpoint, for us, it's less about, hey, let's get your first-party data and put an ad in, pre-roll or something in your publication. It's much more about how do we create native content that actually people care about. And so that's changed the game in terms of how we think about working with publishers.
And I would just add on that, because I agree totally with that point, but I do think the ad experiences have gotten a little bit better when you talk about those really targeted opportunities. I think it's no longer kind of the remnant banner inventory that it.
Oh, I love that. Oh.
I know. But yeah, I think like Facebook's done a really nice job, and some of the publishers in the room, like the ad experiences are just starting to feel more premium. And so I think when you can kind of combine those targeting opportunities with those really nice, engaging, or even native formats, that combination can be very powerful.
But let me mess with the publishers in the room, right? Yeah. So why should I work with you when your audience is declining and really old? So all of a sudden now,
Our audience is not declining and that old, for the record.
So
I don't know about those guys.
I told you I was going to mess with you on it. So the reason I kind of push on that a little bit, right, is that you guys are reinventing how you go to the public, which is changing. I've seen it. I've seen it from the Wall Street Journal. I've seen it from New York Times. I've seen it from the Washington Post in terms of changing the way you think about working with advertisers. Another change is how do you begin to think about us as a publisher? Right? Because we're a publisher. We have a business called Connected Fitness. We have 200 million registered users in that business. They consume content every day. So how do we think about a very different relationship with the publishers where we're actually interacting with those customers who may actually spend more time on my site than yours? So that changes the dynamic. Oh, I know that would never happen, but.
I don't know about those other guys, again. Not us.
So, right, changes the structure of how you think about publishing relationships.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's like we talked about before, it's a competition for attention. And so even for us, our competitors are not just traditional news outlets.
Right.
So game on. Do we have another question? I think in
Hi, thank you for bringing this very interesting panel. My name is Rebecca, and I work at Colgate-Palmolive. And my question will be around about the measurement. So I'm wondering if you have any perspective about how to connect the dots from the different measurement tools. For example, at Colgate, when we do as like the multi-channel marketing campaigns, we have the pre-campaign to do the pre-testing to validate different creative types in terms of the videos or print ad. And also on campaign, we work with like the brand lift with the different publishers to test more about the attitudinal data, and also have the media metrics, which is more behavioral. While for the post-campaign, we have the marketing mix. So I'm really it's a very challenging question to me, as I was asked to try to find the pattern, like the correlation, to see especially from between the brand lift versus like the sales lift from the marketing mix. So if you have any ideas or like the best practice about this sort of the topic, that would be really very helpful. Yeah.
Did you meet the Watson lady? Like, from our standpoint, I think you kind of hit on all the traditional things. I think that there's this desire to really, you want to quantify the method, but then you trying to figure out how you add the magic, right? The math and the magic together, and you got to be okay with the fact that there's an element of magic for us. So, I'm a big believer in that kind of concept of attribution and being able to show that and being able to then, for an internal audience, to be able to say, take the data that you need to take to be able to show the impact that you're making based on who you're talking to. If I talk to my sales guy in Germany, he could not care less about the brand lift, because he doesn't get it, right? But he certainly gets, lead conversions, et cetera. So I think that it really, for me, depends on a lot of who you're talking to and then understanding that. And I think most people sort of intuitively get that there is that kind of magic component to that. So we are afraid, in a very data-driven world, I feel like we've kind of forgotten the fact that a great story is a great story. And somebody with a tiny campaign could create this huge buzz, and somebody with a massive campaign budget could make something small. I'm obsessed with this new Heineken commercial that came out versus the Pepsi commercial. And you think the budget of Pepsi versus the budget of Heineken, and guess who's winning right now? So that's magic. That's not just pure metrics. So that's what drives me anyway.
I would say focus on some of the foundational stuff so that whatever you end up doing, you need to make sure that just like your tagging and tracking and all of that is super consistent, and that you have general agreement across your company for how you're going to measure and what metrics, like what's that single version of the truth that everyone's going to see value in. It's be one thing if like your worldwide team thinks that success is going to be defined one way, but folks in the countries think something else. No matter how you measure, if you don't have that alignment early on, forget it.
I think the first thing you do is open up a Colgate store, so you can actually see who's buying. Can you do that tomorrow or?
Pop-up shop.
Yeah, pop-up shop. Right, that's the hardest challenge you have, right? You're out of sync with the buy, so you got to rely on the retailers. So that means that you have to think about things much differently in terms of building your models, because you can use the traditional media models, and you'll get a okay answer out of that. I think in the end, because you're getting more and more data about your customer, you actually have to take on the mantle of building your own models to be able to tell where the demand signals are. Again, because you're not directly connected to the customer, you've got to be able to build those models and then go out and test them.
All right, I think we have time for maybe just one more. Is there another question? Okay, well, I think that's great. Well, thank you to our panelists for this great discussion.
Thank you.
Thank you.